Ever wish you had someone to talk to anytime, anywhere, no matter what you're going through? Meet PsychPal, your 24/7 AI companion designed to help you process your thoughts, calm your mind, and keep you moving forward. Chat anytime during a panic attack, on a restless night, or just when you need to vent. Prefer talking instead of typing? Try voice journaling. PsychPal listens, transcribes, and truly understands. You can even upload screenshots of tough conversations and it'll help you unpack how they made you feel. PsychPal keeps life organized too. It can add appointments to your calendar, track your mood, and even summarize your sessions for your therapist so you'll never lose progress. Plus, built in crisis resources are always just one click away. It's a privacy first, constantly evolving, made to complement your professional care, not replace it. Ready to try it out? Head over to the link in this episode and use my code Pete at checkout to get 20% off your first month subscription to PsychPal. PsychPal, because your mind deserves a companion too. There we go. I think that's the one I like. We got it. We got it. Boom. Welcome to another exciting episode of Pete from Exciting. Before we get started today, guys, remember, go check out my partners over at PsychPal, guys. There's a link in the bio. You use my code Pete at checkout for 20% off. I'm such a nice guy. I got you 20% off your first month subscription. With that being said, my guest today is a master life coach, former tech and finance executive, creator of the Soulfire Method. The one, the only Amanda Christensen is here. Amanda, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic.
So, Amanda, why don't you tell everybody a little more about yourself, and then we'll get into the Soulfire Method itself.
Well, I think before we get into the method, let me kind of go way back. Because honestly, I didn't start with the work. I started with the experience, right? And especially with anxiety, around anxiety. I think mine started before I even had a language for it, probably around 4 or 5 years of age. And up until then, I had when I was about 4.5, almost 5, my family uprooted from southern New Hampshire and moved to Florida. And so that literally ripped me out of like this idyllic pocket of life where I was primarily staying with my aunt and uncle and their 3 kids, which were all a little bit older than me. My cousin Daniel is 9 months older than me, so we were closest in age. And, we spent our time running through the woods, building forts, catching fireflies and pollywogs, and it just felt free. But at the same time, my body was under constant stress. Because even when I was born with a chronic ear and sinus infection. And that they never stopped. It just continued and continued and continued. And how that impacted me was I could barely hear unless something was really loud. So think fireworks, fire engines, or police sirens, right? And then once we moved, so I get ripped out of that little like idyllic life that I think all kids should have. And then we moved to Florida. And that's when I really kind of started to know my parents more because I didn't have the extended family support.
Yeah.
And it was a completely different environment. A lot of fighting. Alcohol definitely was involved in a lot of unpredictability. And what that felt like for me was just chaos, just this constant chaos. There was no real sense of order, just like noise, physical noise, emotional noise. It never really stopped. And what I didn't understand at the time was my system never learned how to filter it out. So even now, when I walk into like a loud bar or crowded restaurant, my body immediately goes into high alert. And the hardest part is I can't always separate the sounds, and especially in loud, noisy environments, because it just becomes like this wall of noise. So, when I was a lot younger, I learned how to read lips in order to hear or whatever. what people were saying, especially in noisy environments. When later on, and I don't want to go into all the details, I'm a suicide attempt survivor. I think about 8 years old. I didn't call, you wouldn't call it suicide, but I just remember going out in the backyard going, God, please take me away. And of course, the answer was no. And then when I didn't get a response from God, I'm like, okay, space aliens, come take me away. And that, of course, didn't happen either.
She said space aliens.
Space aliens, right?
I love it. I love it. Okay. Okay.
So, and there were like, I think little attempts throughout my like preteen and teens.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I reached college that um, it was the summer between my junior year and my college year. And I was very active on campus and had friends and all that, but I had this sense of just being alone.
Yeah.
And it was like, and being so tired. And so that kind of what led to the suicide attempt. That was unsuccessful, in part due to some of my friends. And so after that, I ended up working in a group home for young women, ages not 8, 11 to 18 for the most part for 2 years. And I was a counselor there. And then an incident happened where a house across the street got shot up one night. And I was working nights at the time. And I remember calling 911 saying, this is going on, and talking to the dispatcher. And they said, well, how many shots have been fired? And I'm like, oh, about 15 right now. And they literally laughed at me and said, you don't know what you're talking about, and hung up on me.
What?
Yeah. And so, made it through the night. And, I think we had about maybe 18 clients in the house at the time. And I'm the only person there, and I'm responsible for these girls. And so I reached out and talked to the director of the program and all that. And I said, we need more security because we weren't in the best of neighborhoods, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, we just can't afford it.
Yeah.
And that's when I just kind of said, okay, I'm done. And so then I fell back on, because one of my majors was business, and I really wanted to get into marketing. And so I started networking with marketers and stuff, trying to get my foot in the door. And they're like, oh, you need more computer skills. So this was about like 1988, early 1989. And I'm going, okay. So I happened upon a position at a bank and was offered a position. I'm like, okay, this is a 2-year. I'm just going to do 2 years, get the skills I need, and then I'm going to go do what I want to do. Right. Well, 33 years later, I finally retired. But over the course of that time, I was definitely what they call like a high achiever, because I had these perfectionist tendencies, and also couldn't say no. So, give me more work, Amanda will do it,
Yeah.
right? I became literally a firefighter in a way, because, oh, bad project going down in flames, get Amanda. Amanda will fix it. Oh, this team needs a lot of help, get Amanda. She'll go in and fix it. So I was always like the fixer, always the firefighter, and it was never ending. Because in banking, you don't really have seasons or
Hmm.
time off. And early in my career, I actually became first the assistant manager to our small data center, and then became the data center manager. And so and then my career just kind of spread out from there.
Yeah.
But what I found is when I was working in the corporate world, I was carrying not only the historical stress of like my upbringing and all that fun stuff, right? Is I brought those skills that taught me basically how to survive as a young child and teenager. I brought that with me into the corporate world. And I remember this was later on in my career. I was talking to my manager, and we found out we were both children, adult children of alcoholics. And we got talking. And we're like, yeah, if you ever want someone to get something done, get an adult child of an alcoholic because they're going to do everything. They're going to try to be perfect. They're going to try to get everything accomplished, get the project or whatever it is over the finish line in the time frame, whatever. And that really got me thinking later on because that conversation kept coming back to me and said, yeah, I'm going, yeah, I learned a lot of things, but there are a lot of things I need to unlearn,
Yeah.
especially working in a male dominated space. And so that's why I do the work I do now is because I see these, a lot of women working in male dominated workspaces that are just like I did. I mean, I leaned in before it leaned in was a thing. And I spoke like the guys, I could, go toe to toe and speak up and all that. And I was told I was being too aggressive, be more feminine. Oh, can you take minutes at the next meeting? And, it was just like, wait a minute, I'm in a room full of guys and I'm not being feminine enough, but I need to talk like them so that they can hear me and hear what I'm saying.
Hmm.
And it was just, it just for me and my experience and a lot of my clients doesn't work. And, what I found it, I remember talking with I think it was my mother, this was later on, and she says something like, "How are you doing?" or something like that. I'm like, "I'm just really stressed." And she goes, "What do you have to be stressed about?" And, I was like, "Whoa, what do you mean?" At that time, I had a young child, my son, and I was also taking care of her. I was her primary caregiver, and I'm going and then I had this full-time job that was very stressful, that was, very demanding. I would work 60 to 70 hours a week, plus, do things with my son because he was in scouts and sports and all those things, and then I had her, and it was like, "What do I have to be stressed about?" And I remember thinking in my head, "Everything, woman,
Right.
everything."
Right, because you got so much going on. You have the kids, you got her, you got
Yep.
the high level stress of job. It's like, I'm surprised you didn't have a heart attack the way you were going at that rate because you have all these stressors coming in. It had to be rough on you though, like because you're in a constant state of just animosity and that
Mhm.
constant state of feeling, man. You're just ready to snap at any point. And then for her to ask you that, it's like, well, what do you mean? What do you mean? What am I stressed about? Let me list it for you. You got 20 minutes? Let me give it to you.
Yes, yes, exactly. And, you know, I've I'm no I'm very open about, I
Hmm.
see a therapist. I also have a life coach too. We work on very different things. Um on with both. And, for example, the therapist helps me with because I also suffer from PTSD.
Hmm.
Actually, I think he's now labeled it chronic PTSD. But and then on the life coach side, because of the one I choose to work with, it's more somatic work. So I get
Hmm.
more tools to deal with the anxiety, the stress, whatever it might be.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And the funny thing, a lot of people don't realize a lot of therapists have their own therapists and things like that. And a lot of people,
Mhm,
me and my guest the other day I was interviewing, she's actually a world renowned. She has some international award for being a Filipino woman and things like that. I
mhm.
was mentioning the same thing. It was like that was the thing. A lot of people back in the her when she was starting were like, "Oh, if your therapist had a therapist, they thought they were crazy." I'm like, "Not really. They deal with all these things that people come to you with. It's like." You don't understand the things they get told every single day, the wild things they get told. But
Yes.
I'm really not, honestly not shocked though. I mean, with all the stress and things you deal with and like that. And to me, it's really awesome that you're talking about it because a lot of people won't even mention they're in therapy. It's like, I don't know what you're ashamed of. It's like we all need help sometimes. There's nothing wrong with that.
Mhm.
It's just like you go to the doctor when you need something, or you go to a therapist when you need something, and you have a life coach as well. I mean, why not? You have somebody helping you with what you're dealing with. It doesn't change what you're doing and you've
Exactly.
invented this, you've invented what you're doing all these great things. And it's like, I think people are too quick to judge, about everybody else and what they're doing in their situation because you really don't know anything. And like you said, you found somebody what you were working with that was it's also a child that was of an alcoholic home. You would never know until you start having that conversation about it and things like so that's really cool. And also thank you so much for sharing a little bit about the suicide thing. I know that we're not going to touch on that because obviously you already requested not to, and I respect that space for people in this room. This 100% safe space for that. But it's hard when people mention that because people act weird about it after, like, oh well, okay, I don't want to try and stress a man out. It's no need for all that. Like people do too much for things.
Absolutely, and I remember afterwards, because I was actually, ended up in a, like, mental hospital, which has a whole
Hmm.
'nother connotation on it,
Yeah.
but that was the safest place for me at the time, and I remember several people said to me, "Oh, you were so weak."
Yeah. That gets upset too.
And it's like, if you knew my history, which at that time I did not talk at all about what was going on
Hmm.
and what had happened over the past, up until that point of my life, was you would not call me weak,
Yeah.
because of what I had lived through, survived the whole thing. And so to be called weak was kind of like, no, this is like I'm done. I'm tired. This is not what life is supposed to be like.
Yeah. Yeah. And for anybody who thinks she's kidding, Amanda's got a list of things here that she's got: certified imposter syndrome coach,
Mhm.
certified in neurologistics programming, master life coach certified through Elemental Coaching Institution. Like she's got credentials here. So when she says that, she ain't joking. Like she's not weak in any way possible. This woman's got achievements beyond, even though all these things that she's been dealing with. So let's get into the Soulfire method. So how did you invent that? What brought you to that moment that you're like, you know what, I'm going to change what I'm doing. I'm going to start doing this instead.
Well, it started back, I was still I worked for a Fortune 500 bank in
Hmm.
technology, went through what I call the merger wars
Yeah.
back in the 1990s, I think
Yeah.
it was. Sometimes I get dates wrong here, so bear with me. And, I've built, was part of the team that built data centers. I've moved data centers. At one point, I had a coworker and I wrote the disaster recovery plan for technology, and actually had to execute it twice. One for 9/11 and then Hurricane Floyd, which about killed me. That was the hurricane that bounced up and down the eastern coast
Hmm.
between Florida and North Carolina,
Yeah, that
and
was a wild hurricane, yeah.
it was definitely wild. And so I had gotten to the point where I was in between that, I was laid off for a year and then came back, working in a totally different area in the bank, and I I was just like, "I am so done with this. I am so done with the the patriarchy that goes
Mm-hmm.
on, the boys club. And earlier in my career, I would push back. I remember I was responsible for all the physical data of the bank. So at that time, we would record, um, you know, all the statements, all the transactions, everything else. It eventually ended up on these tapes that looked like sort of like an 8-track tape, if you remember those. But they would hold terabytes of data. And we had these huge silos, and that was the environment I was responsible for, and I had
Yeah.
teams and whatnot. And, especially during Hurricane Floyd, we had a data center in Jacksonville and a couple in Charlotte, North Carolina. And so our recovery, disaster preparedness or recovery was we would take the tapes out of
Mm-hmm.
Jacksonville and bring them up to our system in Charlotte, and we take down half the environment and then bring it up as Jacksonville and then load everything in. So we didn't lose any data. So during Hurricane Floyd, what happened was, oh, the hurricane's not going to hit Jacksonville. It's going to come to North Carolina, right? And so, and by that time, we'd already gotten all the tapes from Jacksonville. And I remember because I had to call in to the board of directors and report what was going on with our data. And this was before we had, kind of scroll back a little bit, before we had the Jacksonville data center, we got the tapes out of there. I'm on the call with the board of directors and said, okay, here's our plan. This is what we're going to do. Da, 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 da. And one of the board members literally said, well, why are we doing that so early? Let's just fly a plane in when the eye of the hurricane's over Jacksonville and then fly the tapes out. And I'm going, well, that's an idea, but here's the problems with it. One, it's a no-fly zone because of the
Mm-hmm.
hurricane. And, a pilot will literally lose his license if he doesn't lose his life because he has to fly through the outer wall of the hurricane. And I was being called stupid and all this other stuff. And I remembered this succinctly because it was the first time out of a few times that I ever had a leader really stand up for me. And it was one of the head, he was probably up, he was high up in technology.
Yeah.
And he also had this lovely personality where he would literally blow. And then once he blew, he was fine. So it took me a while to learn that. But he actually blew up at this board member saying she knows what she's talking about. She knows what she's doing. And he went off on him and he goes, and he was a pilot. So he knew and could cite like the actual FCC regulations and all that. And it was, but it was that type of environment where I was just a woman and I didn't know anything, basically was how I was made to feel. And I realized over the course of my career where I would early on, I would push back. Oh, boys club, you guys, this vendor at the time is taking you all off for golf weekend. I'm coming too. Well, we normally just have guys. Well, I'm coming. I'm the one that signs your contracts. I'm the one that um is your primary contact here at the bank. So if you're taking everyone that has really nothing to do with you, they're just buddies of my managers, then I'm going to.
Yeah.
It was so, I didn't, I wasn't like quietly sitting back going, okay, this is how it works. And da, 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 da. I was actively pushing back. But again, would kept getting called aggressive and, not feminine enough and all these things. And I'm like, I have to talk this way. I'm talking with the exact words you use, but Joe over here gets commended for how he says something. I say the exact same thing in the exact same tone, and I'm being aggressive.
Yeah,
And that's
exactly.
because I'm a woman. So, so I noticed I got really, really quiet. I stopped speaking up. I stopped calling things out. I just, because it was like you get hammered on so much that you're like, why am I doing this? You know? And for me, my nervous system was very out of whack at the time. I didn't know anything about life coaching. I didn't know about anything about somatics or neuroscience or very limited stuff, because I was in the thick of it. Um, and so it was later on in my career, and I was talking with my therapist, and I'm like, I need to get out of here. There's just, my son was having issues at that time, major issues, and my mother's health was really failing. And it was just like, I can't take on anymore. And I want to do something else. And he was trying to get me because by that time, when I was talking to him and working with him, he's like, "You've done so much research on being a child of alcoholics, you know, being an adult child of the whole alcohol, alcoholic recovery and all that." He goes,
Yeah.
"And with your son, you did a lot of development, how kids develop and all that." He goes, "You have all this knowledge. You need to go back to school." Get your MBA and then get your doctorate in in psychology.
Hmm.
And I'm going, at the time I'm going, I remember going, I don't want to go back to school. I don't want to go. And to me, a degree, yes, a degree is nice. It gives you some credibility, but it's more, I didn't want to be tied to that, I guess, in a way. It
Yeah.
just, yeah, so you got a title. So you have an MBA, big whoop. How does that, and I had started an MBA program at one point and then had to quit. It was like, so what is this giving me that I can actually apply to my work? And it was all this, it was more theory and different things. And it was like, okay, that's only part of the picture.
Hmm.
There's this whole other part, and there's this whole other dynamic part. And nowadays, there's a lot of talk about emotional intelligence. And yes, we need emotional intelligence, right? But you can, in some ways, emotionally intelligence and executive presence yourself into back into old patterns. And that's where kind of where my Soulfire methodology came from, is that internal world we as leaders have, especially for high achieving women.
Yeah.
Because, and I watched this when I was back in corporate. I watched a new, she was brought in from outside with some other leaders. And I literally watched her over 6 months, literally age before our eyes. And I'm going, and I remember thinking, and this was really just like on the cuffs of my starting down the path of becoming a life coach, which my therapist said when I said, I'm not going to go to school back to university and all that. He goes, well, have you thought about becoming a life coach? And I'm like, what's that? So I was thinking, I'm like, I'm wondering what is causing her to age. I knew like we'd be in a meeting and she'd be like this. She wouldn't be, if it was a Zoom call or something, higher level meetings at that time. They were able to do Zoom. We as underlings could not, but she'd be like working and sort of paying attention to the meeting. And it wasn't, and having done that on conference calls before in the past, I knew exactly what she was doing. She was trying to keep up with everything she had to do and also trying to do, basically double tasking, doing 2 things at one time, in which when you actually do that, you don't do either one as well, right? Because it doesn't have your focus.
Mhm.
And but what I noticed in myself first, and then I noticed it in other women. When we went into a room, we might look like really solid, but internally, I was constantly scanning and reading the room. I
Mhm.
was anticipating what Joe over in the corner was gonna say, because I knew he was gonna fight back whatever I said, right? And then trying to manage the outcomes before anything even happened. So when I have clients come in and go, I'm just overthinking things. I'm really strong on this point because I tell them, you're not overthinking. It feels like overthinking. You're just trying to stay ahead of everyone else's reaction, which is a safety mechanism. And it goes back to and for me, you know, being safe and or feeling safe goes back way back to childhood. And what I'm finding in a lot of women, and they don't realize that it it has its roots in childhood. What's that saying? No one escapes childhood unscathed
Yeah. Yeah.
or without some trauma.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's kind of what you have to deal with. And some of it doesn't ever go away, but you can find tools that work for you to relieve those symptoms. And of course, we don't want stress, right? Because we all know um, stress is a killer.
Yeah, definitely.
So, that's kind of how Soulfire was born because I'm like, yeah, I can go in and I can take up space and I can deepen my voice and I can do my power pose, right? But that's not paying attention to what's going on inside of me.
Yeah.
And again, I go back to that chaos because inside I remember just feeling chaotic inside. Knowing that I had to do I'm doing all these things simultaneously, and it's not like I was thinking about doing them, it became so automatic
Yeah. Yeah,
that,
you essentially go into like an autopilot basically. You're already knowing
yes.
these of
Mhm.
yeah, I get you. Yeah, no, that makes sense.
So, that's where, my Soulfire methodology got birthed from.
Yeah, and then I wanted to ask you though about some of the other credentials you have listed, like the
Mhm,
imposter syndrome thing. I think it's really interesting though. What got you to go into that area? Because imposter syndrome is something I dealt with for a long time when I started this show.
mhm.
I didn't realize how big it was until like the demand started coming in, and I just kept telling myself, "Oh no, it's not that big," and like my show just kept booking and booking and booking. Like we're booking out to almost August now with 3 to 4 people on the 2 days I have open because I went from, one day, like, going a couple during every day of the week to just bulk recording it and then distributing it that way, and, and I don't think a lot of people understand what, imposter syndrome is, so do you wanna clarify that for some people that are listening at home?
I think, imposter syndrome is when you show up, but in the back of your mind, you think, who am I?
Mhm.
Who am I to do this role? Or who am I to say these things or talk in front of these people or whatever it might be? It's that question of who am I to, where you don't feel good enough or worthy enough or whatever. And I think I struggled with that at some points in my life. Uh, but I kinda always knew who I was, but I
Yeah.
didn't always show up that way because I, was more in the performance mode. I'm gonna show up and perform how people expect me or want me to perform. And that in itself, when you start doing that, going, "Oh, I need to tone it down in meetings," or "I need to say it this way," that helps bring on that imposter syndrome because you're constantly questioning, "How do I say this so that it will land correctly and I don't
Yeah.
get the pushback?" And so that's, and again, imposter syndrome can, start back when you're young. So yeah.
I just thought that was interesting because I went to your website and looked at some of your background stuff. I was checking it out, and I saw the neuro logistics programming. I'm just like, these are some pretty impressive areas to be in, especially
Mhm,
put the work in though. I mean, it shows. I mean, Soulfire is doing really well. I mean, and you clearly have the credentials that you're doing so, man. And it's awesome though. I mean, it's so cool to see it. I know when we met at the summit, I was already drawn in. I was like, yeah, we got to talk more about this. This is interesting because I always find it interesting when you meet other people or are life coaches because everybody has their own method. And that's the great thing about it though, is that everybody's method works differently, and then you work with women, which is really cool too, because it's like, a lot of times women always get pushed to, or you always hear the phrase, "Oh, go back to the kitchen." You still hear it now. These guys telling girls, "Let's go back to the kitchen," and
mhm.
it's like you don't understand. Like women bring a lot to the table. The emotional side of things,
It's
they bring a lot of that to the table because us guys we're not allowed to be like that because us men we tell each other we're wusses and oh you can't have sensitive feelings and things like that too. And I
mhm,
think that it's really cool to see women succeeding all these kind of things, because it
mhm.
it means that that whole campaign Nike had for the longest time. If you can do it, I can do it better, kind of thing. The whole thing proving that women can do the same. That whole campaign that came out. It's like, yeah, why can't they do it just because they're women? It's like you're not asking to do anything other differently than what we're doing. And it's always been a
Right, we
male
just
dominated
might
role.
yeah,
Mhm.
we just might do it in a different way, and here's a very interesting fact. Women, corporations that have a CEO that is a woman or predominant amount of people that are female on their boards, they are more successful financially. They have more innovation. They retain their talent. Um, and, across the board, all performance rises
I believe it.
compared to um, like a patriarchy setup where it's mostly men.
Yeah, no, I get that
Uh,
completely. I think it makes sense though because women have more compassion than men. Like you see a lot of these
mhm,
men driven businesses. We had a gentleman on the show named Brandon. He runs a podcast as well called The Breakfast Club, and he worked with a lot of these Fortune 500 companies. Now I didn't ask him what were male run, but you could probably tell based on what he was saying. He was like, I talked to a lot of them. And I said, he told him like in 10 years, if you keep going the way you're going, you're not going to exist as a company because you're going to run out of people. And we men are always told, book up, keep doing this, that whole macho male persona they want us to put on, the alpha male thing. And to me, it's just, I think it's all horseshit, honestly. I think it's stupid, makes no sense. It's archaic and anything, it's like that old world method doesn't work these days, especially with the ever evolution of these younger generation of learning more about their emotions and things, and females being more in tune to theirs. Cause I raised three daughters of my own for a little bit before they lived with their mom. And I learned a lot about, like how females operate things. Cause I had to be that mom in the relationship because their mom wasn't there for a little bit of their life. So I had to be
mhm,
that present role. I had to be the sensitive part of that, and this led to the conversation before. I told you about the woman that told me I needed to chop wood because I wasn't man enough. I'm like, well, why are we going back to that method? It doesn't make sense. What is wrong with understanding how the other side of the coin thinks? I think if anything, it
mhm.
makes you the alpha male because you understand these things more because you are in tune to everything around you. And I think I hate that whole tower system males have. It's like, oh, we gotta okay, so then if you're the alpha male, why does it you can't talk about your feelings, you can't talk about your thoughts and everything else? You have to put this macho persona on because it's not working. You know what I mean? It's just doesn't make
Right.
sense to me. With the ever changing way that society's going and things that are going, it's like we're instead of evolving, we're staying in this caveman way of just Lord is going to break it and it'll work. It's like it doesn't work like that though. If you add the emotional touch in there, you've gotten the edge because now you understand how the other side of the coin looks, and I feel like
Mhm,
that's what happens to a lot of female businesses. They have more understanding of what, these methods aren't working and, they're using the logical sense because we as men, we're just sometimes hard headed. I'm like, I'm going to be honest. We're just hard headed. Let's be honest. We are. We
yeah.
have that caveman logic. We just want to bang it and think it works. You know what I mean? Hit it with a club. It ain't working though. That's the problem. If you look at like Amazon, places like that, these places where they're just constantly churning through people, it's like, what are you doing? Like you're not sustaining a work. It makes no sense. You should be looking for longevity versus trying to just mill through people because by the time you run through it, it makes no sense. You want to retain people because always turnover rate's always an interesting to see with a lot of people. Whenever
Uh-huh.
people come and work wherever I'm at, because I work in a gas station setting, so like I'm always curious to know why people left their last job because that's what I've asked, and they feel like, well, oh no, they used to work here, so why did they leave? And no one ever asked that question. It's like, why did you leave? And you didn't ask them why they left. What it was that upset them? That because that would be my first question is that if they have such a colorful background, they have a lot of experience and they left somewhere after being there for so long, then what made them leave is the question. If why not stay there even longer if you were there that long? And I think that's a question a lot of people forget to ask is like, the why? Why'd you leave? What was it that, and take those answers and use those to make better yourself so you beat the competition that way. I think too many people are just like, well, let's burn through everybody and then nobody wants to show up. And it's, oh, we can't find people to work for us because your methods don't work. Like you burning through people too fast just doesn't make any
Mhm.
sense. And I think Brandon had a really good point. He's like, a lot of these top 500 companies, he's like, they just burn through people and then they don't realize, at the end of the day, when you don't have anybody, who's going to run your company then? It's like, you don't think of longevity. You're just thinking of, let's make money now. No, let's think of the long game. Like, why not play the long game in the end of this thing?
Right.
And especially with mental health, like a lot of these companies have no idea even begin. Like mine doesn't. I could tell you right now, mine doesn't. They say a little flyer about it. They offer 4 sessions of therapy. I'm like, 4 sessions of therapy isn't enough for people. I'm sorry. If somebody's really struggling and you really want to help them, you got to do more than that. There's got to be more options out there for people than just that. Because talk therapy doesn't work for everybody. I think that,
Right.
a lot of these holistic approaches are coming through even stronger because a lot of people are finding they fit more to what they're doing. And that's what I love about the show is that I invite all those type of people here because I want people to know, what hypnotherapy has been the one big one that's been coming through this season. A lot of
Mhm.
hypnotherapists come in and they make a lot of interesting things, because everybody doesn't realize, like how a lot of stuff works. Hypnotherapists go deep in your mind. They don't stay in the forefront. They go to deep in your subconscious where a lot of the stuff lives. And a lot of people are like, oh, and then you get I've had a couple neuroscientists come on. I love talking to them because they're always so great, man. They have such great insight in things. One of them,
Mhm.
especially, we talked to was talking about negative self talk. She was and I were discussing. She had said that they discovered that your negative self talk comes from a part of your brain that a lot of people didn't even know existed. And I was like, this is really cool because you get all of them come in and give you different insights and things. But I agree with you. I think your statistics are right though if you think about it because women have more compassion than men for a lot of things, and it's just because the way we've been raised. Like, look at how we are now
Mhm.
as society. Like, look at how these social posts where they tried to degrade women for no reason. It's like, why? Why are you doing that? Like that's somebody's mother out there that you're degrading because you're just like, oh well, I'm not gonna do this. It's like, come on, guys. You know how stupid we sound? You know what I mean? It's just it makes me laugh when I'm watching these guys say things. And then you see these guys how they interact with women. And it's just like you're watching them and they're like, well, I'm single. Well, I wonder why. Think of what you're doing ain't working. You just keep doing the same approach. To me, it's just stupid. It makes no sense.
I totally agree with you, and I also know from my own studies,
Mm-hmm.
um, and just kinda I tend to watch people,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I do too.
and it's very interesting because the men I worked with, they were very A plus B plus C equals D.
Mm-hmm.
Where I myself, I take things, okay, this piece and this piece, this piece and this piece, and then bring it together and go, "Whoa,
Yeah, you look at it from a
this is
logical
not."
standpoint. You're not doing that driving force like, oh, I'm just gonna power through it kind of thing. Like, yeah, it doesn't work anymore,
Yes.
guys. Sorry.
Mhm. And so, I bring that into, my methodology.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I have, what did I forget. I think it's called, Line Leadership Pattern Quiz.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can actually go in, it's free. Go in and it explores how you actually think and comes up and says, "Oh, maybe you're a um oh, I can't even think of one now." Oh,
Amanda,
I'm
I
getting
have
a
you ever
little bit long in the tooth. But, say I am let's just say connector. I know that's one part of them. And so m um, and I'll probably get this all wrong, but, you connect different points of things and come
Yeah.
up with, and, it could be things from left field or something that's totally irrelevant. And what I found, going back in my career, I remember when I came back after being laid off, I was working with this team and they had this process. It took them 170 days to do. And I'm like going, that's way too long.
Yeah.
Why? And so I dove into all the different steps, worked with them. I got it from 170 days down to 2 weeks.
That's what I'm saying. You know,
And it
so these
was,
people go the weird methods they come up with make no sense. Like, why do that?
yeah, I'm going, it makes no sense. So yeah, and I think the going back to your original question about why did I decide to kind of leave the corporate world,
Hmm.
was a variety of things, and I had literally been working with my manager at the time for, like, 6 months of how to find a way out of no way for me to stay, because she definitely knew my value, because she's like, you should be doing my job, if not higher." And I'm like, "Yeah, they forget to tell you about the trap door." Um, and so we were talking, and I happened to get on a call. I was managing a project, and they brought in a new technology leader for the Indian team that was doing the development work. And he came in and he hadn't even been there 3 weeks. We get on this call and he is like laying into me about how I don't know what I'm doing. I've run this project into the ground and all these other things. And I'm going, what? You don't know do you know the history of this project? He goes, "No, I don't need to know that. I just know basically he was saying I was incompetent." And there were 2 things. One is, yes, I did push back and gave him the history of the project. A lot of it was based on other leadership decisions of leaders that were on that call that did not speak up in my defense. And I was like, "Okay, here's the history. Da, da, da. We are the only We were basically building, a new application from the ground up." I said, "Within 6 months, without full teams, staffing that we'd been promised, and all these other things, we have deployed the basic framework of this application into production. The business unit is going crazy over it. They love it. Just what that first phase that we put out. And they're going out telling their counterparts. And now their counterparts are coming back saying, we want to get in on it. So how can you tell me that I don't know what I'm doing?" And here's and I've done it I was supposed to have, at that time, it was 3 scrum teams. If not, originally it was supposed to be 5, and then they reduced it to, "Oh, you can have 3." And I was basically working with 1 team. And that's what we did, in basically 6 months
Yeah.
of bringing that team on board. And I'm going, that's never been done in this bank before, to my knowledge. How am I incompetent in all these other things? And, "Oh, you're gonna bring in this other team," which I knew about beforehand because I had been made aware of this. I said, "Yeah, I talked to them. They're not gonna be available for another 6 months, and then their availability is only gonna be 20%. That's not gonna move this forward, because they have to learn this whole everything that we've done in order
Yeah.
to get plugged in to do the work." And I said, we're set to finish in February. I think this was like in, I wanna say it was April, or maybe it was March, April timeframe.
Hmm.
And I said, we're on target to full deployment in the bag in February." even though we don't have all the resources we need and we're dependent on these other teams for support because they have to do their little piece, right? And they're saying this project's not a priority, but you're telling me it's a top priority because we're trying to mitigate a security risk. And so tell me where, no, we can have it done by September of this year. I'm like, good luck with that. And so I got off that call and I immediately texted my manager and said, I'm putting in for retirement. That call literally broke my back because not only that whole discussion, but there were leaders in that room that I had worked with for years that knew what I could deliver.
Yeah.
No one spoke up in my defense.
Yeah.
And I was basically, it was on a call, but I was basically the only female in the room.
Yeah. See, that's ridiculous. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's really not shocking, honestly. But Amanda, we're at the point of this interview where I'm going to ask you those two questions I previewed you about earlier. Okay. So the
Mm-hmm.
first question is kind of a fun one. I borrowed from a friend of mine that runs a podcast called The Shit That Goes On in Our Head. Okay. So my question to you is that if your mental health had a song, what would you say that song would be?
If my mental health had a song, ooh,
Yeah, this is a really fun question because you get a lot of interesting
I
answers to this.
I think for me, at this point in my life is I'm not gonna take it.
There
We're
you
not
go.
gonna
Yeah,
take
okay.
it.
Okay. I like that one. All right. Okay. That's the first entry for Twisted Sister to come on. But I
Yes.
loved it. I think it's a great song. I think it's a great one for you because you really weren't going to take anybody's shit. You're like, forget this. I'm done with this crap. So,
Yes.
Amanda, the last question and the reason I started this podcast is that if you could break the stigma about mental health. Now, when I ask you this, I'm asking you from the aspect of things that you hear or something you hear when people stop believing. What would you say that would be?
When people repeat that?
I said, would you could break the stigma about mental health. Now, this question applies to anything that you hear that you just want people to stop believing, that, like any kind of false narrative you hear people saying or things that you hear from your own clients that you constantly hear people saying. What would you say that would be?
I think this, what I really, really want to break is this false belief that everyone is fine. That I'm the only broken one. Because I see that in so many people and in my clients to a large extent, but I was one of those. I was like, I felt so broken for so long, and I would look at other people and go, "They have it. Why can't I be like that? Something's wrong with me." And it's not that something's wrong with you. I talk to a lot of my clients. I'm like, I'm not here to fix you.
Mm-hmm.
We're here just to kind of move some things around and reframe things so that it doesn't affect you like it has been. Because, we're all humans. We all bring different experiences to the table. Different things have happened to us in our lifetime that just adds to it. We bring our experience from our work to the table. And so we're all unique and we all have different talents. And to compare yourself to someone else that you think is better or is healthier or whatever it might be is basically wrong because you don't know that person's story. You don't know what's going on behind the scenes because they're not allowing it to show.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. Absolutely love it. I think you make really great points all in there, man. And thank you so much for coming and hanging out with me. I appreciate it. I had a great time getting to know you and learning more about the Soulfire Method. Before we log off, do you want to let everyone know where they can find you? Plug that website. Let them know where they can come find you.
You can find me at www, of course, .amandalchristian.com. And I'll send it to
Look,
you later, but I'm on
lay on
LinkedIn.
those. There you go. Lay in those social links, girl. You got to get them for them. Where else
And
can they
I
find
have
you?
a YouTube channel that I just
Awesome.
started up called Soulfire Leadership.
Nice.
And let's see, I'm also on Instagram,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not as heavily on there as I am on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, listen, guys, I'll have all those in the bio for everybody to get to. Amanda and I will make sure I have the right ones and everything like that. But again, Amanda, thank you so much for coming to hang out with me. I appreciate you. It was so great getting to know you. And I love exactly what you're doing. Keep going, man. Just keep going, because what you're doing is working. You know, you're helping a lot of people. With that being said, guys, we're going to wrap up this episode of Pete vs. Anxiety. You guys want to find me on Pete vs. Anxiety on X, all the way down to TikTok. I'm on Spotify, all the way down to Pandora Radio. And as I always say, it costs nothing, absolutely nothing to be kind to somebody. One kind act you could do could save their life, or hell, you can make their day. I'm Pete vs. Anxiety, saying, don't ask how your day is today. Say, hey, how's your mental health?